The President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, expresses his solidarity with the Cuban counterpart, Miguel Díaz-Canel, in the face of the attempts of the United States government to destabilize the peace of the Cubans.
Cuba has been applied the same method of suffocation, persecution for 60 years, and now the North American empire is going to say nonsense. If the United States and the extremist opponents also in Cuba really want to help the people of Cuba to immediately lift all sanctions and blockade against the people of Cuba. From here, from this dialogue table and from this presidential palace, I ratify, as I said yesterday by telephone to President Miguel Díaz-Canel, all the support of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, to the people of Cuba, to the revolutionary government of Cuba. Brothers in the good and the bad always. Brothers, and Cuba will succeed with the union and the majority consciousness of that noble and a heroic people who have.
A commemorative act, the people of Venezuela expressed their solidarity with Cuba and spoke against the interventionist acts of the U.S. against the island's sovereignty. In a rally in front of the Cuban embassy in Caracas this Monday, Venezuelan citizens reiterated their commitment to the revolutionary struggle and their support for the Cuban people in the face of the U.S. blockade and aggressive policies, the most recent example of which was the support of acts of destabilization in several cities of the country.
Cuba's government has received a shipment of 20 tons of humanitarian aid from Bolivia, as well as medical supplies and food from other nations as Mexico, Venezuela, and Vietnam to face the United States economic and commercial blockade. The Minister of the Presidency of Bolivia, Marianela Prada, announced that the humanitarian aid includes medical supplies and food. It was made on behalf of the Bolivian people as a promise of brotherhood made by President Luis Arse. Prada affirmed that the shipment seeks to confront the blockade maintained by the government of the United States. The Caribbean island received in the last few days humanitarian aid from Mexico, Russia, Nicaragua, Vietnam, and Venezuela.
We are very grateful. Bolivia has always been one of our brothers. Nothing is too little. The small details make the big things. We have also done so at a time when the Cuban people are going through a complex situation, both from the epidemiological point of view as well as from the food point of view. We have received donations from other countries. We have looked for different distribution principles and criteria. We are informing our people where the products we receive are going. They are being received with much love and gratitude, and we are sure that we will continue to be repaid and very grateful for this gesture and well. The hours of flight will not be in vain. That same warmth that you feel here, that same warmth of humanity and solidarity, and we receive it with open arms in our country.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced on Monday that his country will send 2 ships of humanitarian aid to Cuba, while again denouncing the United States blockade policy against the island.
I take this opportunity to say that we made a decision out of solidarity in the face of this situation of blockade, which wants to politically subjugate the Cuban people, the Cuban government. We made the decision to help, to provide our solidarity in the face of this blockade, because it is not enough to vote every year at the UN against the blockade. And I take this opportunity to call on all countries of the world that what they express at the UN by voting against the blockade should now be converted into an act of solidarity with the Cuban people.
Mexico mass rally was held outside the Cuban embassy in capital Mexico City to support the political stability of Cuba, and they rejected the U.S. blockade against the Caribbean nation.
Our support is more for the revolution. We know that there are shortages of medicine and food in various parts of the country, but this is thanks to the blockade that the United States has maintained against Cuba.
Since the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, I think it has shown us that everything Cuba has done has been for the benefit of humanity and the people who need it, and the Cuban medical brigades are proof of that.
Mexico's Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard met with several foreign ministers during the select meeting. He met with Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez and both discussed important issues regarding their bilateral relationship and the COVID-19 pandemic. They also assured their commitment to cooperate and strengthen the bilateral relations between both nations. The Mexican Foreign Minister ratified his country's solidarity with the government of Cuba in the face of the recent attacks by the United States. Hundreds of protesters have rallied in Mexico and the United States to defend Cuba and reject foreign destabilization. Many activists gathered in Washington, D.C. to demand the end of U.S. blockade on the Caribbean nation. Meanwhile, in Mexico, social organizations have marched in the capital to support the Cuban government and to defend the rights of the Cuban people.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said on Monday he was in favor of a solution through talks and without the use of force to resolve the Cuban international problems, and offers to send help.
To help Cuba, the first thing that should be done is to suspend the embargo on Cuba. As most countries of the world are requesting. That would truly be a humanitarian gesture. No country in the world should be besieged, blockaded. That is the most contrary thing to human rights. And it has to be the Cuban people who decide, because Cuba is a free, independent, and sovereign country. There should be no intervention.
Diverse sectors and organizations of Argentina mobilized towards the Embassy of Cuba in Buenos Aires in solidarity with the Caribbean islands. Before the political media operation promoted and financed by the U.S. government against the Cuban people, a movement that integrates guilds, social organizations, and civil society demonstrated in front of the Embassy of Cuba to condemn the economic blockade imposed by the White House.
Prime Minister of San Vicente and the Grenadines, Rolf Gonsalves, showed his solidarity with the Cuban in regards to the events that took place in the island and issued a statement on Cuba's remarkable and enduring revolution. The Prime Minister stated that the protests in Cuba, which were fueled by unlawful imperialistic economic sanctions, bring into focus the remarkable achievements of the Cuban people and the revolution despite the monumental challenges, and highlighted the island's milestone and producing at least 2 vaccines against the COVID-19. He rejected the attempts of certain forces who seek to make the Cuban people prisoners of presidential and senatorial political of Florida Leslie.
Rights and democracy, and urged Washington to end the blockade against the island. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Charlie Shan stressed that the unilateral US sanctions of blockade are the root cause of the medical and energy shortages in Cuba and have seriously violated the Cuban people's rights to development. He stressed that the US should abide by the purposes of the UN Charter and the basic norms governing international relations, and heed the calls of the international community to immediately and completely lift the blockade against Cuba and stop its interference in the country. He also reiterated that China is ready to work to contribute to Cuba's efforts to overcome the impact of the COVID-19 epidemic. Russia has called on Azerbaijan and Armenia.
China urged the United States to listen to the appeal of the international community to immediately and completely lift the sanctions and the blockade against Cuba. Also, to stop making excuses to engage in cross-interference and destabilization. On July 30th, the U.S. Treasury Department announced sanctions against Cuba's National Revolutionary Police, and it stopped 2 officials citing repression of anti-government protests. During a meeting with the Cuban-American figures at the White House, President Joe Biden said that there will be more sanctions unless there is some drastic change in Cuba. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that his country firmly opposes any move to arbitrarily impose unilateral sanctions and interfere in other countries' internal affairs under the pretext of the so-called freedom, human rights, and democracy.